The glass shattered before it hit the ground. Richard Sterling, billionaire, patriarch, a man who had shaken hands with presidents, was falling. 200 guests in that glittering ballroom watched him drop like a building losing its foundation. The chandelier light caught the Bordeaux as it sprayed wide across the marble floor. Somewhere behind him, a woman screamed, and in the middle of all of it, an elderly black man in a simple linen shirt set down his old leather bag, knelt quietly beside the unconscious body, and pressed 2 fingers to his wrist. Nobody moved, because nobody could believe what they were seeing. 3 months earlier, none of this existed yet. There was no ballroom scandal, no 200 open mouths. There was just Ethan Sterling standing at a folding table inside the Riverside Community Center, sorting through a box of donated pencils, when a woman across the table started laughing at something a child had just whispered to her. He looked up. She had yellow paint on her sneaker, a pencil tucked behind her ear, and she was labeling each pencil case by hand, one at a time, writing every child's name in neat, careful block letters. She wasn't performing anything. She wasn't watching to see if anyone noticed. She was just doing it because it needed doing. Her name was Grace Brooks, kindergarten teacher, $41,000 a year, a 2014 Corolla with 140,000 miles on it. She talked to Ethan for 4 hours that afternoon and left without trying to impress him once. He texted her that same night. For 6 months, they were inseparable. Sunday hikes, cooking disasters that ended in takeout, long phone calls that became long silences that neither of them wanted to break. Ethan had dated women his father had approved of, polished, pedigreed, daughter of somebody women. None of them had ever made him feel the way Grace did, like he could exhale, like wherever they were was already the right place. When he finally told his father, Richard Sterling did not congratulate him. He called within the hour. "I've seen the girl you're seeing," he said before Ethan could get a word out. "Her name is Grace, Dad." "I've seen her file. 41,000 a year, public school, East Side apartment. Father listed as retired, no assets, no connections, no—" "Stop." Ethan's voice went flat. "You had someone investigate her." "I protected my family. There's a difference." "She doesn't even talk about money. She has never once asked me for anything, and you can't even—" "They all ask eventually, Ethan. Every single one of them. You just can't see it yet, because you don't want to." There was a long silence. Ethan was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "Okay, Dad. I'm going to marry her," Ethan said. "Marry her and you are no longer my son. I mean every word of that." Ethan was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "Okay, Dad." He hung up. He married Grace 4 months later. 20 people, folding chairs, wildflowers in mason jars, a cake Grace's co-workers had made at midnight the night before. Ethan wore his grandfather's watch. Grace wore her mother's earrings. Richard did not attend. But he didn't cut Ethan off either. He threatened it the way men threaten things they're not prepared to follow through on. So the Sunday dinners continued. Grace came to every single one, always on time, always composed, and Richard was always in his way, unkind, not loudly. Richard Sterling had the specific cruelty of the quietly powerful, the glance at her dress that lasted half a second too long, the way he said the word schoolteacher like it explained everything he needed to know. "I've always respected people in service roles," he said one evening, refilling her wine glass without being asked. "It takes a certain kind of person to do that work. Doesn't it, Grace?" "It does," she said pleasantly. "A lot of patience." She never gave him the reaction he was looking for. He couldn't understand it. He poked and prodded and waited, and Grace just kept smiling and saying the gracious thing. It maddened him, but what maddened him most was the one question she would never fully answer. "When do I meet your father?" He asked it at every dinner, every occasion, every time he passed her in the foyer. A man should know who his son married into. "He prefers a quiet life," Grace always said. "He'll come when the time is right." Richard told his business partner on the golf course that Grace's father was probably someone she was embarrassed to be seen with. A labourer, maybe, a man who never amounted to anything. Why else would she keep hiding him? He was completely certain he had never been so wrong about anything in his life. Then came the announcement. 40 years of Sterling Enterprises, a lavish anniversary dinner, 200 guests, live orchestra, a Michelin-starred chef, and Richard called Grace personally. "I want your father there," he said. "Tell him I insist." "I'll ask him," Grace said carefully. "This isn't a request, Grace." She called her father that night, and they spoke for a long time. She had been protecting him, not out of shame, but because she knew what happened when people discovered who he was. He stopped being her father and became a story, a symbol. She had watched it happen her whole life. But after everything she had endured at those Sunday dinners, after a year of quiet cruelties and loaded pauses, her father listened to all of it and then said softly, "Baby girl, I'll be there. Don't you worry about me." If this story has you hooked, smash that like button and subscribe so you never miss a story like this. Keep watching. You will not believe what happens next. The night of the anniversary dinner was everything Richard had built it to be. Bentleys lined the driveway. A senator arrived in a motorcade. Champagne clinked. The orchestra played something soft and expensive. Richard worked the room like a man who had spent 40 years rehearsing for this exact evening. At 8:17, the ballroom doors opened. The guests near the entrance turned first, then the people behind them. The quiet spread inward like a wave moving across still water. No one could have said exactly why they went silent, only that something about the man who had just walked in made the room reorder itself. Dr. Samuel Brooks stepped inside. He wore a linen shirt, worn dress shoes, polished with care, an old leather bag on his shoulder. He was unhurried, unbothered. He moved through the gilded room the way a man moves when he has nothing to prove to anyone in it. Richard crossed the room. He made sure the guests around him could hear. "So," he said, smiling wide, "this is the famous father Grace has been keeping from us all this time." A few people laughed. Most smiled politely and looked away. Grace felt Ethan's hand close tightly around hers. Dr. Samuel Brooks looked at Richard Sterling and smiled back. Gently, without any defensiveness at all. Then a chair scraped back, hard and fast, from across the ballroom. Dr. Gerald Fitch, head of cardiothoracic surgery at Mercy General, decorated by 3 governments, invited to speak at Johns Hopkins twice, was moving through the crowd with his glass already abandoned somewhere behind him. His face had gone pale. He pushed past 2 people, then a third, and stopped directly in front of Samuel Brooks. "Dr. Brooks?" The old man nodded once. Gerald Fitch took his hand in both of his, not a handshake, something closer to a bow, and his voice dropped so low that only the people immediately around them could hear. "I trained under your program in Lagos in 2003, sir. You probably don't remember me. There were 40 of us. But I have thought about what you taught me every single day of my career. Every single day." The room held its breath. A woman in pearls touched her companion's arm. He stiffened. Then he walked toward Samuel. Then a second surgeon. Then a university president. Then a woman who had run surgical response teams for the WHO for 15 years. One by one they came, some introducing themselves, some just moving close. The way people draw near to something they need to confirm with their own eyes is real. Richard Sterling stood in the centre of his own ballroom and watched it happen, and felt something inside him slowly give way. Gerald Fitch turned to the room and spoke quietly. No speech, just facts, delivered with the weight they deserved. Dr. Samuel Brooks had spent 35 years as a pioneer in humanitarian surgery. He had trained over 800 surgeons across 12 countries. He had performed thousands of operations, most of them free, in field hospitals, in rural clinics, under generator lights. He had refused private contracts worth millions. He had donated most of what he had to build surgical training centres in underserved regions across 3 continents. He had been offered knighthoods, honorary, degrees, endowed chairs at 4 major universities. He had accepted none of them. He had retired to a small house on the east side of the city, where he still volunteered twice a week at a free clinic. Someone near the back said it quietly, like a breath. He's a legend. Richard barely heard it, because he was remembering 11 years ago, a private plane, a fuel system failure, a clear afternoon that became smoke and torn metal and darkness. He had been pulled unconscious from the wreckage and airlifted to the nearest hospital where a trauma surgeon had already been called in. He spent 4 days in a coma. He woke up to his wife weeping at his bedside, and a recovery the doctors called extraordinary. He had never met the surgeon. He had received a letter. He'd skimmed it. He had wired a donation to the hospital and considered the matter closed. He had never thought to ask the man's name. Gerald Fitch was answering someone nearby. There was a case about 11 years ago. Thoracic reconstruction after a crash. Under 30% odds. Dr. Brooks worked through the night. The patient walked out 4 weeks later. The room turned toward Richard. The glass slipped. His knees buckled. The Bordeaux hit the marble and shattered. And Richard Sterling, who had controlled every room he had ever entered, went down. Dr. Samuel Brooks was already kneeling beside him, 2 fingers at his wrist, calm and practiced and completely present, the way he had been in 1,000 rooms, harder than this one. Subscribe and drop a comment below. What moment hit you the hardest? We read every single one, and don't go anywhere. The ending will stay with you. Richard came back slowly. He opened his eyes, and the first face he saw was the face of the man he had publicly humiliated 20 minutes ago. Samuel Brooks was checking his vitals, unhurried, thorough, with no trace of resentment anywhere on his face. Richard stared at him for a long time. "Why?" he said. His voice came out cracked and small. "After what I just did, why?" Dr. Brooks met his eyes. "Because that's what I do." Ethan helped his father to his feet. Richard looked at his son and everything they hadn't said across 10 years of formal dinners and hard phone calls passed between them in a single glance. Then Richard looked at Grace. She was standing a few steps away, still and quiet, and watching him with the same dignity she had carried into his house every Sunday for a year. The same dignity he had spent a year trying, quietly, to take from her. She hadn't broken, she hadn't bent, she had just kept coming back, with patience he hadn't earned, and grace he hadn't deserved. Richard walked to her. He took her hands in his. His voice broke completely. "I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. I treated you like—" He stopped, tried again. "I am sorry, Grace. I am so deeply sorry." Grace looked at him for a long moment. Then she pulled him into a hug. She held him the way she held her 5-year-olds when they were overwhelmed and needed someone steady. Not because they had earned it, but because they needed it. Richard Sterling wept. Right there, in the center of his ballroom, in front of everyone, When he pulled back, he looked at Dr. Samuel Brooks, who was standing a few feet away with his bag on his shoulder and the same quiet expression he'd had when he first walked in. "You saved my life," Richard said. 11 years ago. It was you." "You never reached out," Richard said. "You let me go 11 years not knowing." "I wasn't doing it for a thank you," Samuel said. "I never was." Richard exhaled, a long, shaking breath. He turned back to Grace. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he almost let himself lose. "My daughter," he said. "I should have called you that from the very first day." Grace's eyes shone. She pressed her lips together. And then she smiled. That same steady, unhurried smile she had been giving him through 12 months of small cruelties. "Better late than never," she said. Dr. Samuel Brooks kissed his daughter on the forehead, shook Ethan's hand, and nodded once at Richard Sterling. Then he picked up his bag and walked out the same way he had come in, quietly, without ceremony, without needing anything from the room. Because he never had. Some people spend their whole lives building towers and calling it a legacy, but the things that actually last, the lives changed in the middle of the night, the students, trained in makeshift hospitals, the broken things quietly repaired, those don't need a name on a building, they just need to be done, and Dr. Samuel Brooks had spent his entire life doing them. If this story moved you, subscribe, like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment. Your words mean more than you know.